Hey, good morning, everybody. I didn't bring my chains today as mayor. I have like 3 sets, and they get heavy to travel with. But yeah, delighted to be hosting this session with some just really incredible, bright minds and thinkers, and we're just going to jump straight into that in a moment. Just a little bit about I guess, my thinking around customer experience, as that is kind of the core focus of our session this morning. We've a great title, and we're not going to spend too much time before we jump into the content here. But if I think about the best customer experience, I like to think about it as defining, turning raw materials into something life-giving, something transformative or meaningful. And to give a quick example of that, if we think of the material PVC, this is actually the diagram makeup of the raw material for PVC. It's actually just oil and salt. And so when that's combined into something meaningful or transformative, it can express itself in many different ways. And this little video is a good example of where that can go.
I think that did pretty well. Let's try something else. Give me a hand.
So I guess if you're the owner of a 400 grand Ferrari, having a PVC bubble surrounding that when somebody's throwing crutches and stepladders is pretty transformative and pretty meaningful. And so, yeah, I'm here with Dual Roles, the mayor of startups on FT's Innovation Hub side of things, but also working with an Icelandic-based company called Plan 3, tackling passenger disruption. And a kind of brief background to us and how we focus on the customer experience in this space is that we had early origins with many of our team members, including the company founder, coming from WOW Air, low-cost carrier out of Iceland. And the picture down here at the bottom was how that airline were currently, or at that time, dealing with passenger disruption. Picture taken at 4 a.m. with the whiteboard and a spreadsheet being the weapon of choice to handle the disruption. So it was really, how did we get from a not-so-wow customer experience to something far more compelling when we think of innovating in this area. And it's, if we think about applying that definition, like a life-giving or transformative moment to disruption, which is as ugly, actually we distilled it all just down to one core principle, and that was to ask the question. So in the moment of disruption, if the airline is able to give choice to the customer, to ask them, hey, what option would best suit you for your onward travel? 3 powerful things happen. We preserve that pressurized inventory, we stop no-shows from happening, and then most importantly, the customer feels like they've been seen, they've been heard, they've been empowered. And then, of course, we use technology to automate the actual solution there. So that's kind of my experience and how we're dealing with this in a customer experience stance. You will see it goes from on the left, like a horrible picture, we've all been there, to actually nearly 2/3 of passengers will self-serve if you ask them the question, and delivering a much superior customer experience. So that's kind of my personal experience, I guess, recent years of how we're turning something raw into something meaningful and life-giving. And without further delay, that was a bit of context for the session we're just going to jump into. I'm just going to invite all our panelists to make their way on up here. Come on up, guys, and we'll jump into some questions. And just to say, while these guys are getting settled in, if there's we'll have some times for questions throughout. So we'll have a roaming mic out there. So I'll just get settled in here as well. Good stuff. All right, fellas. So yeah, maybe I'll just start with working down the line here and just getting a quick introduction from all you guys and a minute or two on your kind of background, which is hard because you have a lot of stuff to cover in a minute or two in your careers and exposure to date. But Bobby, why don't you tell us who you are and why in the world you're here?
I'm Bobby Healy, and I'm a model for Spring Water.
It's true.
I run a drone delivery business called Manna, and I also run and founded a travel technology business called Meili. So I'm speaking with both hats today. And Manna drone delivery is what it says on the tin. Right now, in North County Dublin, 20-minute drive from here, there's about 200 or 300 deliveries being done by air from Tesco's, the roof of Tesco's, to homes across suburban Dublin, flying things like coffee, onions, ice cream, groceries, and everything in between. And that's what I'm building at the moment.
Fantastic. Looking forward to unpacking that. And Lilie, introduce yourself.
Sure. So I call myself a product guy since 15 years, and 5 or 6 of them I spent in airlines, so namely in between SAS and Qatar Airways, leading digital transformation from within, so kind of setting up customer-centric product management, also sitting on the management teams for the loyalty programs just to make sure that I was at the heart of high-yielding customer data, so same setup virtually. Also been working on other consumer products, music streaming in Spotify, financial services in PayPal, and now running my own show. So kind of my agency is supporting various clients on really trying to help companies understand what their customers really want.
Fantastic, fantastic, thank you. And Russell?
So I'm Russell. I look after proposition and innovation, commercial proposition and innovation at easyJet. So a lot of the ancillary revenues that you'd be familiar with. I've been in the airline for 6 months. Before that, I looked after innovation at Costa Coffee. If you're not from the UK, we're kind of a Starbucks, but bigger in the UK. Innovation there is literally the thing that you drink. And before that, hospitality at Premier Inn, where I looked after the brand and then innovation. So kind of innovation, but not particularly anchored to one particular industry.
Fantastic, thank you. And Guido?
Yeah, hi, I'm Guido, one of the co-founders and managing directors of Manyone. We're a global strategic design agency, been working with airlines for the last 15 years. 4 years ago, we started to set up Manyone. We're now 350 people in 14 studios worldwide, and I've been working with airlines for around 15 years. Was fortunate enough to be the lead for the loft, the design of the loft in Brussels Airlines, for example. Been changing or restructuring the SAS Euro bonus program, working on Miles & More's digital strategy, and a ton of other things. Vueling transformation, if you might have seen earlier. And I've been looking at the airline industry for most of the time from the external perspective. In between, I spent 1 year in Lufthansa Group being the head of customer experience design or passenger experience design. And then, co-founding 4 years ago, Manyone with some friends of mine. So I've been always very attached to the airline industry, but mostly with the external view, and trying to bring that into the process.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, it's great to have everybody here. So if anyone out here is like me and you've had those moments where late at night, maybe you've already eaten, but you're just like, I would just murder a bag of chips right now, a bag of French fries right now, and you're just figuring, like, how can I just make that real in my hand right now? Well, there's one of us amongst us who actually is turning that into reality here with this drone delivery service. But Bobby, I think this was the origin story. You had a desire for chips.
Yeah, murder a bag of chips, too much wine on board, and munchies after the wine. And anyone that lives in Ireland knows what a bag of chips means at 11 o'clock at night.
It's true.
And so I built an entire business and raised $50 million so that I could have a bag of chips every Friday night. That's pretty much it.
Think of the amount of chippers you could have just bought for that.
The killer use case is, look, if anyone lives in a suburb, it's impossible to get delivery to a house in a suburb in a economically viable way, or in a way that pleases the customer. So if you order McDonald's, for example, McDonald's after 5 minutes decomposes into mercury, arsenic and wood chips, whatever it's made out of. But if you can fly it at 110 kilometers per hour, and our delivery time is 2 minutes 40 seconds, then it tastes exactly the way it should taste. And that's why coffee is our #1 delivery product. 35% of our volume is cappuccino.
Wow.
And because it's viable.
And you've been a couple of years into this now, and I remember talking to you right in the onset of this, and you recognized that just the technology in drones had reached a point where you figured, we can establish on top of this, it can go places. Fast forward a couple of years where you're now, what are like some of the cool stats you're seeing? You're touching on some of them there in terms of consumer deliverables. What are your observations?
Well, what's different about this business is behavior. So we get ordered. We've sold 7,500 different Tesco products, for example. It's something as simple as one onion, one carrot, one head of broccoli, all the way up to toilet roll, emergency toilet roll. I'm not sure what the use case is there. But all sorts of weird things. But what we're very happy about is the level of adoption. So 40% of the population, we've served 46,000 people now, we've done 160,000 flights. 38% of the population use the service more than 1.6 times per month, 1.6 times per household per month, so which is way in excess of what traditional road-based delivery would achieve. So the question we've answered is, if we build it, will they come? If you have a drone, something as crazy as drone delivery, will it be adopted? And the answer is yes. And then is it more than a novelty? Is it one order? And thanks very much, that was great crack. No, actually people use it for everything. And we've completely replaced road-based delivery now where we operate. There's no more road-based delivery, it's all drone-based delivery. So that's what's interesting about it.
Yeah, wow. And there's a link here with the coffee connection to you, Russell, because you have former exposure to the brand, like company owning Premier Inn and, of course, Costa in the UK. And we'll maybe come on to that at the moment. But I know you have an interest in the customer experience kind of rooted in consumer behavior and maybe some of the reference points to experiments and tests done back in the 60s. We were talking about this before. I was curious for you to unpack that a little bit and how that kind of infuses your perspective on the customer experience.
Sure. I do want to say, though, I was always amazed at how many people wanted coffee delivered to them. And actually,
Coca-Cola own the Costa brand.
They do now, yeah.
They're an investor in Manna now. So.
Coffee degrades quite quickly, and you put a flat white or a cappuccino on the back of a bike, it's not going to be a great experience, but people still want it. So I always think if you don't know the answer, have a process to get to the answer. And for me, it's actually quite simple. You just go right back to kind of classic consumer psychology. And I suppose I'm a fan of behavioral economics as well, and the whole Kahneman thinking fast and slow. Seems like a lot of the big insights were created back in the 60s and 70s with all those kind of behavioral experiments where you can get a student to electrocute another student if you give them the right incentives, right? So like people are fairly predictable, dare I say, at least on average, around how do you get them to engage in a brand or an experience. And so how can you take it right back to consumer needs, consumer insights, and your brand's right to play, and put those two things together in terms of that's where I think the innovation often comes. And it doesn't always need to be the big leap forward as well. It can often be the kind of the last mile solution, right? So one of the other things we were talking about in coffee was, one of the big innovations Costa did was Costa Express, which is a self-serve, fresh bean-to-cup coffee that's available in places like Shell service stations. And the technology there was not radical, right? It was inside those machines is a bean-to-cup machine that actually you would find in a hotel. Nice graphical user interface. The innovation was finding the business model that would allow the servicing of the equipment to a garage provider who couldn't really take care of that. And so putting together the servicing infrastructure and the economic model that gave incentive and profit share was where the insight and the innovation came, rather than the big leaps of technology. And we tend to get a bit hung up on big mega trends and how the world is shifting. And every time I've listened to a futurologist over the last 20 years, we've always been on the cusp of major change. But I think the underlying consumer dynamics are actually, because humans haven't fundamentally changed the way they work, right? The brain has not rewired in the last, at these big cusp moments. Yes, there are occasionally big technologies that come forward, but companies like easyJet, Costa, Premier, we can't actually really accommodate big technology leaps anyway, because we don't have the ability to be at the front end, and it's not really our role, right? People want us to bring simple, easy solutions, which usually doesn't mean bleeding edge.
Yeah, and when you come from a previous world largely focused on hospitality, and now in this role with easyJet, what are some of your early observations of the differences? Do you see any constraints in the airline space that technology or legacy or otherwise that are forcing you to operate a different way? They're making you think more creatively around workarounds, or do you see any key differences in those two sectors?
Yeah. I mean, actually, in some ways, there are a lot of similarities, right? So I had a project at Costa which was around bringing in a wider range of milk alternatives the challenge wasn't how do I create or find the right milk alternative. The challenge was how do I put it into the fridge, and how do I train a barista to be able to handle lots of different milks and manage the allergen constraints. And actually, you have exactly the same thing going on boards with the cabin crew, and how do you select and prioritize the right things, and how do you manage the constraints of the supply chain and the space. I don't look after F&B at easyJet, by the way, but you can see the same dynamics play out. I do think one difference across industries is the use of consumer data. So in airlines, I think it's a bit like the hotel world, where a lot of the data is quite backward-looking. So yes, we look at customer satisfaction metrics. It's a revenue management model, so there's a huge amount of booking data. In contrast, if you work in consumer goods, where I've spent a lot of time, all of your data is about drilling deep into unmet needs and future-looking primary research. And so I think a lot of companies have preferences for the kind of data they use, and there might be a bit of an opportunity around adopting the kinds of data from different industries. So if aviation was a bit more future-facing its data search, I think there could be, and a bit more qualitative rather than quantitative, I think there might be a route into deeper insight that could unlock accessing unmet needs.
Yeah, fantastic. Guido, you, I know, grew up with a love for aviation. I think you had some early exposure with your dad bringing you to some local airfields, and you can tell us a little bit about that. You made a point when we were talking earlier that you had this observation working with airlines that a statement rather that we fly people, not planes, but actually most airlines see that the other way around. So why is it so important that is flipped from a kind of design thinking, customer experience point of view?
Sure. I mean, when you look into the history of aviation, how a lot of the airlines were built and created, and how the business models were created, there was very little focus on passengers or customers initially, right? It's due to the nature of the complexity of the system they operate. It's one of the most complex products that you have out there. There are so many uncertainties that you don't control because it's controlled by partners, suppliers, air traffic control, whatever else. So you're working in an extremely complex system, and in order to make money in that system, the first focus in a lot of airline business models was really not the passenger, right? It was like, yeah, well, we get the money from them, but actually, like, we have to control a lot of other things first before we can think about passenger experience. And it was just the icing on the cake. It was never the foundation of why the airline existed, or never the foundation of how the product was done. This is changing a lot in the mentality of airlines recently in the past, but still the pressure, of course, comes from the complexity of that system. And in order to innovate in that complexity and to innovate in a system that is so much under commercial pressure, and where so many little balls and nuts all need to fit together in order to produce money at the end of the day and positive EBITDA, customer experience is, of course, only one small part for many airlines. Still, for all the airlines that I worked with and we work with, as you quoted rightly, I always go there and I say, the first step in putting people first, putting customers first, understanding customer behavior, needs, expectations, and turn that into business opportunities or loyalty or love for the brand, is to understand that you don't fly planes, but you fly people, right? It's a fundamental mind shift, right? And it might sound very arrogant to say that, but it's ultimately, that's the only way how you can put people into the center, right? And also it's important that in that statement, it says, as an airline, you don't fly planes, you fly people. It's not just the customers, also the people, as Shay said earlier, that deliver that service. And that's the magic difference you make. So you create some sort of customer experience that's still with a human touch and delivered through people that represent the airline, because in a world in which aviation becomes ever more automated, especially all the touch points between you as a consumer and the airline, no matter from self-booking, self-check-in, AI-supported rebooking in cases of disturbance, stuff like this, there are only a few moments left where you can make a difference as a person, and those are the moments there. So in order to understand that the difference is, or that the perspective you have to take, the shift of the perspective needs to focus from away from the logistics of flying a plane into understanding what motivates people to be part of this brand on both sides, either providing the service or getting the service and paying for it. That's where it starts. And that's a very, very tough thing to change, because if you grew up in the industry, you were basically socialized around other factors that are not driven by CX metrics. You were not educated to be CX-centric, you were educated to be controller-centric, or operations-centric, or network planning-centric. And that's a long way to go for many of the airlines.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, speaking of customer centricity, I know, Per, it's a kind of a deep obsession for you, is that eyes on the customer. You have an interesting perspective because you come from strong airline exposure with SAS, Qatar, but then of course you've clocked up some mileage with Spotify, PayPal, and now your own consultancy. You talk a little bit about this use of inside language, which can be a little bit unhelpful, and can you unpack that concept and why that is? What's the opposite of that?
Sure. So, yeah, just to back up a bit, I think it's all about user empathy and building that trust. And I learned in one of the good presentations yesterday that I think 2/3 of all the travelers in 2025 will be millennials or Gen Zs. And these are the generations that they dream the most, they spend the most, but they also expect the most. So they will expect, I mean, you were talking about self-service before. They are used to Uber self-service, not airline self-service. You also need to ask the questions that they can answer. And, as an example, don't ask for a PNR in an airline seat. Just don't do it, because they don't know it and they don't care about it, and you're not helping them. You're not showing them that you care. You can solve it. I've solved it. There are several examples. I see ancillary was put here on the stage. This is an internal event. It's fine, but be careful about using that word in front of your customers, I would say. Might have another example. I need to count to 10, I think, before, because I know the airline is in the house and they won a lot of awards last night. But I think earlier this week I was trying to book the summer holiday for my family, and so I wanted to do it myself. I'm part of this generation. I filled in all the information, and what I received was an error message like, oops, can you try again, or can you call us, right? And so I did the next day when they opened, and I said, hi, I tried to book this online, I have all the flight numbers. I know Amadeus, I know what they will be asking for, so I had everything prepared. And then he said, sir, you said that you tried online, then you need to call the online service center, not the service center. Stop doing these things. Luckily, there was a low-cost Irish airline that could help us.
There always is. There always is. Yeah, no, it's a great point. And maybe come back to you, Bobby. When you think of it's a super interesting space, and you have Amazon, I believe, spent multiple billions on this already, and then you've Google owned Wing. I think you described them as perceived certainly as a gold standard in drone delivery. It's just incredible that we have this. Home territory, which is so for you in launching this product. So what were kind of some of your main drivers, even outside the customer experience piece, for Ireland, and using this as a test bed, and then where's this going with you guys?
Well, so for frontier technology that we're building, so think of us as an aircraft designer, an aircraft manufacturer, an airline, and an airport, and on top of all of that, a consumer marketplace. So pretty trivial. And what you want to do is reduce friction, reduce difficulty level, whatever way you can. And being in Europe, what Europe loves to do is regulate stuff. Europe is really good at regulation. And in most cases, that's a disadvantage. Look, particularly at AI and what's happening, the blockers to AI progress. But in the case of aviation, European regulator EASA are way ahead of the rest of the world on regulation for drones at scale. And so by us being in Ireland and having the partnership we have with the Irish Aviation Authority, which ultimately reports into the European one, we have an environment here where it's possible to do what we're doing. And it would be impossible to do this in the United States, for example, that has a regulator that's industrial grade, but too big and just isn't thinking about transformative technology. So the reason we're here and the advantages we have are structural competitive advantages. So Amazon has spent over $3 billion doing 10 deliveries. Google have built an amazing program, but they spent $2 billion doing it. Big companies are just as smart as we are. They're no different. But large organizations, and I think some of my fellow panelists understand this really well, it's very difficult to move a big ship, but it's much easier to move a speedboat. And so small companies have a massive exponential advantage over big companies for doing things that have a lot of uncertainty to them. And technology always has uncertainty, but it has product market fit uncertainty, it has technical feasibility, all sorts of uncertainties. And so you can take risks because rolling the dice in a startup, you either go out of business or you're successful. Whereas in a big company, it's different, right? There's politics, there's the law of large numbers of people, there's permutations, eventualities, there's careers. It's impossible for a large organization to do something as difficult as what we're doing. So we have an advantage. And we've, as I said, we raised $50 million in venture capital. We probably need another, I would say, another $200 million roughly to be a viable business. So there's that other problem of how the hell do you get that much money for something that's so unproven? And that's where me having built Car Trawler, me having built Elan, this is my 5th startup, it helps, right? It helps in confidence to say, let's place a big bet on something that's highly likely to fail and give it a go. And then the stupidest thing you could do is to build a business like that in Ireland, where we have the shittiest weather every day. We live on an island on the west coast of Europe. That's the dumbest thing you could possibly do. But if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere. So, sorry, long version to the answer, but that's it.
And probably a certain demographic of inner city kids who like to actually fling objects, flying objects.
We've had that, yeah. We've had incidents where we've been with catapults, we've been hit, but we're designed to survive that, so it's not a problem.
Oh, that's good. So yeah, and speaking of like the risk element there, I know Russell, we were talking about this before, where there's this kind of a driver for you, I think, like really embracing risk for the benefits that can bring to an organization, and how some of your work is shaped by the influence risk has on both you personally and where that can bring an organization. Can you talk to that a little bit, that point a little bit, as to why risk really in an airline space or any big organization should just be really embraced?
Yeah, I mean, calculated risk, I suppose, or informed risk, or not just rushing heedlessly in, I suppose. And I totally sympathize with the point around large organizations. It's not a new insight, is it, to say that the barriers, the hurdles, the access to resources are tough enough, that big organizations aren't usually the best at taking risks. So hats off to the Lufthansa team, who obviously showcased the fact. I really like the comment around just kind of do it, rather than asking for permission. And in my experience, a lot of my career has been in marketing, and therefore a lot of comms, so actually shows up quite well in comms. Some of the best work I've done has been the edgiest work, and would not have been approved internally if I had taken it to my boss at the time. So the things that I stand by and am most proud of are the things that probably might have got me fired. A couple of examples. So I renamed Premier In to Premier Out, which these days doesn't sound that radical, but at the time, and it was part of a kind of a tackling homophobia in football kind of support around Pride about 10 years ago, and it kind of it's essentially hijacked that campaign. I was the brand director at Phones for You, a quality retailer in the UK that no longer exists, but it had a very kind of clear target audience around disenfranchised youth. And we ran a sort of anti-Christmas campaign with Santa's peeing and things like that. And I went home one night and came back the next morning, and somebody in the web team had taken the logo and applied it on our homepage on the logo, and literally it was like this article in the BBC, has Phones for You been hacked, because basically there was Santa pissing on the Phones for You logo on the homepage. But it was the thing that got cut through, right? We had a minimal budget versus competing with Vodafone and O2 at the time, who had more than 10 times the amount of marketing budget. And so that's how we got our customers, as speaking their language. But if you ask for permission, you often don't get it, right? So it's about having a bit of conviction that what you're doing is worthwhile and worth following through, and then taking the calculated risk, and then frankly being willing to fall and recognize that it's just a job ultimately, not if it's your own company, but nevertheless being willing to stand up and take a bit of risk, and maybe hopefully have enough credit in the bank if it goes wrong as well.
Sure, absolutely. And Per, maybe a question for you around, so again, you're this product guy with a focus on customer, obsession about the customer, but also have a footprint in the airline space historically as well. What are some ways that you see an opportunity, like Russell's pointing out here. You want to try something out. Maybe you don't have the resource, maybe you're not going to get the buy-in, but how can you ship something fast in that kind of a context where there are some overhead, some constraints, but you still want to test to get the data point back? Like, what approaches could you example there?
Well, there are many books written about Agile, I guess, and quite of a big toolbox. One of the things that I've, experimentation, of course, you mentioned before, that could be an hour itself or a full panel itself. It's more of a mindset, I would say. But from that toolbox, you can, if you look at the tech companies, they do a lot of so-called smoke testing or fake it till you make it. I think that could be applicable more. Most customers fly once or not even twice per year. So you need to engage them in between, you need to collect those data points, and you can try out new concepts before you have actually built out those concepts. So just a recent example, so I'm working now in a media company, and we knew that we wanted to do a newsletter about health because it's a hot topic. And before we started signing up with editors and influencers and tech, we started doing the sign up on the web pages and on the social media. And hey, do you want to start follow our newsletter? And so when they actually clicked it, we said, okay, sorry, we haven't started the newsletter yet, but could you please help us a little bit more? What kind of newsletter within health would be helpful for you? Mm-hmm. And that, the users will always guide you to what they want. So they told us that, okay, we would like to learn, we would like to have courses. So we signed up influencers, and we 2 weeks later we started, and 10,000s of subscribers paying for this now. And not a single complaint that, you fooled me or tricked me or anything like that. I mean, that's what tech companies do all the time, just kind of faking it and, pivoting just to make sure that you don't start on something unless you have, users behind it. Yeah.
And I guess in that essence of just always trying new things, Guido, we were talking about this potential future that you have this angle on where airlines could be reduced to just owning the seat and not owning the customer, and actually other parties owning that customer. So talk to us a little bit about that, and obviously why that's such a problem, but also kind of the antidote, like how design thinking can kind of shape an airline's response to prevent that outcome.
Yeah. So I think what many airlines or very often don't realize yet, or are very, let's say, in the very early stage of realizing, is that there's one thing that is very hard to mimic for others, and that's providing, of course, the physical seat on a physical plane with staff that's certified to fly, and so on and so forth. What's very easy to take away from them is the relationship with the customer. Somebody connects in a better way to make sure that, especially as you said, people that fly once, twice, 3 times a year, where loyalty is not so much on the brand where they sit in the seat, but on the experience they have before, after, and all of these elements. So what airlines very often don't really realize is that if somebody starts to disrupt not the product as the flight that goes from A to B, but the way how you get into the product and the way how you get after the product back to the same product again in a year or in 6 months or in 2 months, then you're really under pressure, because once you start to loosen the connection to the passengers, the knowledge, the data, the information, the reasons why, it's not just that you will have a much harder way to predict or to build a network to predict which flight needs to go where with how many seats, stuff like this, but you always also start losing the ability to sell anything extra than the seat, right? Because somebody else will start doing all of these things in between. So it's really important for airlines to understand that the customer experience is not starting the moment passengers get to the airport or on the plane, and it doesn't end the moment they get off the plane, right? It starts much earlier and much later. And one of the things that we see in airlines, and we encourage airlines to do, especially the ones that we really work with that are, willing to disrupt, is one thing that Bobby also mentioned, which was really interesting, is to try to get away from this big ship and instead help them build smaller speedboats that can experiment with things outside of that physical hardware product or the airplane or the airport, and actually try to be more risk aware and more with more ability to be always almost like an entrepreneur for a product or a service. So there are lots of airlines that build little ventures that only do small things, small parts of the customer journey or the customer experience, but they do this with a lot of autonomy. And they're okay to fail because it wouldn't harm the overall brand, it wouldn't harm the overall product. There is more entrepreneurial spirit in this. So trying to understand how you can take certain aspects of the relationship between you and a passenger, implement that into maybe a startup, a venture, a spin-off, whatever you want to call it, and give that team and that venture an ability to experiment, to build something, and to be away from the mothership is super, super helpful. But you still need to understand the basics and the fundamentals of how airlines operate, because what you're not doing is you're not working in an isolated space where you're not connected to the rest of the organization and how their business evolves. You still need to understand how that plays into the overall ecosystem, but being taken out of the headquarters into its own unit, into its own venture, really, really helps to be much more risky on purpose and experimental.
Yeah, fantastic. Maybe let's throw it out to our audience here if there's any questions for on any of the topics you covered or haven't covered. Any hands or any questions? Just we can come back as well in a few moments. I suppose continuing along that point, maybe Russell, when you kind of think about those comments in terms of like there's just no shortage of projects. You know, you're just hit with them, and at events like these, you see solutions left, right, and center. So how in the world do you prioritize? Like, what are some of your filtering for that?
Yeah, there's prioritization. I was also reflecting on your juggernaut point, which was also kind of yours around how hard it is to shift organizations and how hard, like companies are really good at what they do today, and it is very hard to envisage the future. And when you set up those satellite projects, the problem often becomes the reintegration back, right? So that is the classic 3 Horizon model. Horizon 3 is actually the set up the independent entity, and then Horizon 2 is integrate it back into the core, which is Horizon 1. But companies really actually get to Horizon, they really are able to bring it back in. It'd be interesting if you've got examples where actually those experiments have worked. But part of that problem of the juggernaut is it's no secret, aviation and most companies are just sitting on legacy stacks of IT, and it's they're kind of quirky, right? Because they've been built over time and they've got all their idiosyncrasies and internal language that relates to it as well, which is coming into a company not always the friendliest, right? And so you've got to find solutions that can kind of work within the constraints and find the spaces within those constraints, and then ruthlessly prioritize, right? And for me, it comes back to what I was saying at the start around the prioritization being around what's going to add the customer value, because the revenue then follows. You will commercialize it, but if you don't build that customer value, and to be very choiceful and to know your role in the brand. So we probably won't commercialize some things that other low-cost carriers might, because maybe we don't quite hold that position in the market around. It's just, you know, people expect a little bit more, which is quite an interesting position to sit in the middle ground, right? So how are you going to meet the brand expectation and create value is essentially the priority. And create money, but that almost becomes later. So you don't necessarily always start with what's the biggest revenue in that prioritization exercise. But it's very hard to find those white spaces within the constraints.
Yeah. And, you know, empathy is such a big part of this. And Per, we've talked about this as well. Like how can you really release a view, an empathetic view in an organization which maybe historically hasn't majored on that? How do you do that? What are some of the techniques you can foster to kind of weave in data points that can kind of prove that out to mindsets that maybe aren't quite there yet?
So again, it's really about understanding, like, what frustration are you solving for? Like, how to prioritize? What is it? So there was a very wise man here yesterday morning, Sir Tim Clark. That's what he said. You know, the power of the customers will drive the business model. Like, you need to get the users behind it. You can do cool things, but you can't scale it unless you have the users behind it. You can, you know, again, there are toolboxes. There are ways that you can build this user empathy, and, you know, depending on if it's on a team level or, like in this case, perhaps so on a management level, Yeah, just so one example. So in 2 weeks' time, I've organized a focus group. So inviting customers, using a really good agency for that. And so I mentioned I'm helping a media company. So I invited the full senior management team, and this is a big company, like 800 people. So it's like it's a big commercial airline size. And so basically, they will be able to listen in to the customers' frustrations and wishes, and to get the real versions. And that I would say is one way of doing it on that level. And I've done it before, and it's very fruitful. Like it helps you be more frank about prioritization and innovation, essentially, like how to create that real value, like where should you start?
Yeah.
So, yeah, many other things in the toolbox as well, but I would recommend that one on a top management level.
Yeah, fantastic. And maybe just in the couple of minutes we have left, maybe penultimate question for you, Bobby. I work for an Icelandic company, and of course the North Scotta travel is a dude called Meili, and as if you're not busy enough, you thought you'd flip up another startup on the side called Meili. Tell us about the new venture.
Yeah, I mean, I built and ran car trawler for 15 years. I completely screwed that up. And when I look, I've been 30 years building companies in the travel industry. Before car trawler, I had another company called Eland, which I also sold. And when I look at what we built with car trawler, myself and Mike, we're very proud of it. We became the worldwide leaders in it, but we made some massive strategic errors. And the benefit of hindsight and timing is very important. Like any startup, timing is everything, but you're forced, timing you don't choose either, right? So you make do with what you have. And when myself and Mike look back at what we built at car trawler, it was very successful, but it was a three-sided marketplace that ignored the customer completely. And we focused our energy on generating revenue for our airline partners at the expense of the customer experience. And the luxury of being able to build it again is start with a blank slate, build it the way it should be, which is friction-free, marrying a marketplace between airlines and car suppliers, much easier. And you don't get all this, you don't get knifed by customers every day that have had an awful experience because they've been missold an insurance product at the desk. So a natural marketplace, same technology, different business model. It's a privilege to be able to build it a second time. Some would say boring, but it's incredibly disruptive and a joy. And that alongside Manna, I know it sounds a bit strange that I'm building two companies, but wouldn't be the first time I've done it. I've done it before. It's actually very easy. And on the last subject, which I found really interesting, why didn't you ask me about that? There's a book called Technocracy in America, which describes how governments do decision-making and bring people along for the ride. There's the Singapore, the technocracy, the autocracy, the dictatorship, the democracy, and they all have advantages. And companies mirror governments in that sense. And I would recommend everyone to read that book, Technocracy in America.
Yeah, and like maybe just a little bit out of time, but since the moment we're in, you talked about timing, technocracy, we are at this advent of a huge acceleration in artificial intelligence, and driven by ChatGPT and its capabilities, and like just, I've read articles of people describing this as like it's the biggest invention of all, release of all time. It's bigger than the internet, it's bigger than Industrial Revolution, the potential. Huge hype and talk about it, and of course, if you've tried it out, it is like wildly phenomenal. Maybe a quick 30 seconds from each of you on how this is poised to impact the customer experience and impact the travel industry. I know none of us have a crystal ball, but curious to know your gut feeling.
I'll answer quickly. I'm a programmer, so it turbocharges development. It will reduce your costs and make time to market for new projects much, much quicker. You'll need less programmers, and the ones you have will be far more productive. That's the black and white benefit straight away of AI tools. Everything else difficult.
Thank you.
Cost saving for sure. Lots of operational use cases, I would say. More so than perhaps, delightful customer experiences in the next 3 years, I think.
Yeah. Russell?
Customer service, personalization of experience, the inspiration piece up front, I think, pretty powerful.
Yeah, it will automate and it will increase the efficiency in a lot of, let's say, non-competitive and non-comparable and non-unique aspects of aviation, and it will put a huge, huge pressure and focus on the human side of aviation, because that will be the factor that still makes a difference. All the human touch points that you will see, because the non-human ones will be so much automated and streamlined through AI that that's not where you're going to make a difference from a brand's perspective.
No, nobody talked about any potential negatives, so it's all good. It's all good. But Guido, Russell, Per, and Bobby, thank you so much for your time today. Really, really enjoyable talking to you guys. Give them a round of applause. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.